as well. Phew. Okay. All right. So let me introduce my two wonderful guests, and they're long-term friends as well as associates of independent thinking. So Hywel Roberts, who is known to most people, we must have reached peak Hywel by now. There must be not Hywel again, for heaven's sake. He's a traveling teacher, a man in the Matalan suit. He's a writer, an author, and he's just so passionate about being in the classroom with children from all backgrounds and bringing the best out of them in all sorts of ways, and in particular with a focus on the curriculum, which we'll come to. And then Debra Kidd, Dr. Debra Kidd, who makes that link between here is our academic understanding of what the world of education needs, and then the link in with politics, and this is what can go on in the classroom. And not only, I've seen her not only work in this country, but I've seen her work around the world as well, especially with it linked to her work around theatre and her work around creativity. And again, with this focus on bringing the best out of the little humans in our classroom. So a huge welcome to you. And where do we start? Let's start with it sounds like a really straightforward question, but let's unpick it. What is curriculum? Hywel.
Over to you, Deborah.
Like a daily briefing.
Well, curriculum to me, originally, and I can only reflect on my own career. When I did my teacher training, curriculum was a big sheet of paper and you just wrote some stuff down that you had to do. I was an English teacher, so you may have to as text to deliver to kids. And really the curriculum was, for an English teacher in the early 90s, was to walk into a room and read that book to the children, and they would just listen to you, or they'd read along, which, you know, they'd pretend to do. And it was, I'd been teaching for a while before we started having proper conversations about what the possibilities were around the curriculum. When I became a head of drama, there was no national curriculum, so it was kind of a bit of a free-for-all. It was ACE, and that's why we weren't treated as a proper subject, even though we got the best results in the school and buoyed up the results of the school as well. And what we got a new head teacher in, and that head teacher was called Matthew Milburn. He was very passionate about curriculum, and suddenly it was like the scales fell away from my eyes, and I realized that what we were doing in drama I could have been doing in English, and we could have been doing in MFL, we could be doing in science and across the curriculum. And fate, all the stars aligned, and Debra Kidd turned up. And what happened then was the conversation suddenly became, instead of being a bit wishy-washy, vague, and certainly myself not really knowing what was going on, suddenly we were having proper grown-up professional conversations whilst being innovative and not really knowing what we were doing as a bunch of teachers. And Debra came in to help us with that. So that's how I know Debra, because of that work. So curriculum brought us together in that sense. And in terms of what it is now, curriculum is it's the everything. You know, it's the glue that, well, is it everything? I'm thinking now, I've suddenly realized perhaps relationships are everything. Perhaps it's the adults interacting with children. It's the passion of the adult. But for a teacher to be passionate about the subject, they need a curriculum that they can invest in, and then they get the kids to invest in it. So, and I'll let Debra pick this up in a sec, but a lot of our work now is showing teachers, even though in England we operate in quite a hectic system of oppression almost, we can still do some great work inside that. And that's been I've been developing that thinking, that learning all along, whilst working with Debra and in my own work as well. So in terms of what is curriculum, it's nearly everything.
Wow, nearly everything. Okay. I like, so you're saying it's everything, and then actually there's relationships, and then you use the word passion. But I think what you're saying is that if we get a curriculum that we can all get behind, that allows the relationships and the passion to come through, which is at the core of really good teaching, the curriculum can drive that.
Yeah, and you become the teacher that you intended to be when you signed up to become a teacher, I hope. You know, you become that teacher rather than signing up as a teacher and then feeling like you were naive, or that you had a childish view, or an unrealistic view of it, when in fact we define what could be really realistic in our schools, I think.
I'm still scarred by that Dead Poets Society situation.
Don't bring that up.
they tore it up in front of you, threw it away.
They tore it up.
Get at the table. You're nobody's captain.
I'll need to go and lay down if we talk about that.
We'll move to Debbie then. I'm glad Debbie rescued you from just a load of drama teachers sitting around practicing trust exercises.
Yeah.
Really, Deborah, curriculum, and how did you get that across to Hywel all those years ago? That was right. That was everything.
It was about 16 years ago. I think one of the really important parts of that work was that there was a head teacher there who understood that curriculum is about what you want to happen in your school, not just what's being imposed through some kind of central national curriculum document. And he was already very imaginative in thinking about how connections could be made across subjects. So right from the start, we had a senior leader in Matthew who understood that curriculum wasn't sitting in subject boxes, that he used the terms curriculum should be a humanizing experience. And he introduced a kind of language to the school around curriculum and around assessment that was about curriculum for living and assessment for living. And so the emphasis very much in the school right from the start, as soon as he started talking about that, was this sense that the document that lands on your desk is just a cold, dead document that is being written to try and achieve some kind of national standard, but that it has never been and never should have been the expectation that it looks the same in every school. And then in addition to that, a senior leadership's team's responsibility is to layer onto that cold, dead document the kind of particular aspects of humanity and community that your school environment demands, depending on where you are and your parent group, your community access to whatever cultural experiences you've got, the particular needs of the children in your school. And that with those two things in mind, the imposed curriculum and then the school curriculum, or the needs of your particular school curriculum, you weave that together to give children real life, genuine experiences that put them in positions where they're wading knee deep through dilemma. So that they're being asked to solve problems, they're being asked to see connections, they're being asked to put things together, they're being given a sense of responsibility for shaping and developing their own curriculum experience to an extent. And that's not to say it's a free-for-all and the teachers entirely lose control of it. It's very much teacher-led. But I think the focus of that dilemma-led learning, that problem-solving, direction of travel through a curriculum is really powerful. And now we're in this situation where children are kind of at home, or some of them are in schools, and they're receiving a very, very different kind of experience. And those who have become used to problem solving, having a little bit of autonomy, a little bit of agency, a little bit of a how do we solve this now, if they've been used to that in their education, I think they're probably going to be better positioned now to be dealing with the kinds of situation we're in.
Yeah, so dilemma, what do you call it? Dilemma-led learning. So, and we are in a dilemma, and they're ready for it. Can you give an example of dilemma-led learning? And also, is there a way that it can't be done with any particular year groups or any particular subject areas, or is it everybody open for dilemma-led learning if they change their approach to the curriculum?
Well, I mean, I know Hywel will talk about this quite a lot in a moment, about the way that we use story to achieve that. There are certain, schools who manage to do brilliant dilemma-led projects that are real life, maybe linking with local charities, linking with external groups, where the outcomes are tangible and real, but for many schools that's not always possible all the time. So a story can help position children into imagined world where those problems are their responsibility. So, for example, with little children, I mean, I've seen Hywel do this in reception class, trying to warn a park keeper not to set light to a pile of leaves because there's a hedgehog living inside. And I've seen, you know, I've worked with young children thinking about how we might avoid a war with a dragon who is mad with grief because our King George killed his brother. You know, and you're going to go and talk to this frightening dragon, and you want to try and calm a situation down, you're knee deep in dilemma. And all of the stories I've done with year 3 children living as a crisis management team on the edge of a volcano, trying to persuade a village to evacuate and trying to explain to these villagers the impending situation. Those kids were effectively doing the same job that some of our sage scientists are having to do to advise government at the moment. And it's putting children in that imagined space where it's safe and it's allegorical and it's distanced and there's nothing immediately at stake, but they'll pretend, they'll go into that imagined role, that they get the opportunity to practice things that we couldn't possibly otherwise teach them. You can't, you know, and I remember about 15 years ago when some of the personal learning thinking skills were being talked about, I saw teachers trying to teach formally from the front fairly traditional lessons about how to be a level 5 risk taker, with children dutifully taking notes. That's not risk taking. So you can use the story in a very imaginative way to put children into situations where they can practice the skills of having to deal with uncertainty.
Okay, all right, that sounds lovely. I'm coming back to Hywel, and also there's a question that's come through on the Q&A. So Hywel, in a world where, and it's like the question, especially in England, it's about focus on learning is memory and the obsession with metrics and testing and numbers and naming and shaming and all of that stuff that we know is going on at the moment. Isn't what you're doing, Hywel, just sitting around telling stories and doing a bit of drama and making children feel good?
Yeah, it is that. It's about helping children. I mean, Debra sums it up brilliantly then, but there's that sense of developing articulacy, developing experience through, if you like, a rehearsal for life. So, I mean, I was doing some planning with some teachers yesterday on their bank holiday. You know, we were doing some planning yesterday on one of these, although they're all sitting on their arses. Sorry, they're all sitting around doing nothing. We were planning yesterday, and we were thinking, well, Egyptians, how are we going to make Egyptians matter to year 4 and 5 in Leeds and Barnsley? Because it's a team of school, it's a trust of schools, Leeds and Barnsley. They're coming from a difficult starting point, some of the schools. Everyone's being honest. They need a good curriculum written down to prove that it's happening. But they're very keen for it not to be a dead curriculum, a cold curriculum. They want the warmth. And they came to me and said, can you help us warm it up? And yeah, the straightforward, it's not the only answer, but one way of doing it is to use, as Debra says, to use this idea of a narrative, to place the children in a place where they can practice negotiation, where they can practice resilience. So it isn't just something on, laminated up on the wall, one of these key words that we've all, one of these values that we've got to deliver. We're actually doing it with the class. So when we're planning now, we're planning all the coverage so that we all sleep well at night. But at the same time, we're thinking about how are we going to inject a joy of learning into this? How are we going to move these children? The teachers, they love their kids. They absolutely love them, but they understand where they've come from, some of them. They understand the children's real stories. So how do we protect them into their futures when we've got to teach them Egyptians? which, as a kid once pointed out to me, Romans, Egyptians, they're all ages ago. What's the point? Well, as a teacher, you want to have the backup. You want your curriculum to have your back, don't you? You want your curriculum to cover your back so that actually you've got the space to deliver what you need to deliver, to cover the coverage, but at the same time, to take the kids through. It sounds a bit jazz hands when I say it now in a meeting like this, but that sense of wonder or that sense of curiosity is gently developed. We don't label it, we don't mark it in a different coloured pen. It's just part of the organic development, if you like, of what's going on in a classroom. I hope that makes sense. I know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think it does. We'll edit it.
Okay, yeah. Just take that bit out.
I used to be a French teacher in Northampton, and secondary school kids used to come, Mr. Gilbert, why do we have to learn French? And
yeah,
it's like, well, it's because you live in Northampton and you never know. You know, it's,
yeah, that was your answer.
That was my answer. Yeah, but the idea that your curriculum's got your back, I think that's really important. So it can answer those sorts of questions. You talked about the cold and the warm curriculum. Can you sort of define those two? How do I know which one I've got?
You can see how many kids have been sent out. That's one way of doing it. I think it's the cold and the warm isn't a judgment on anyone. It's just how it's the pedagogy. It's how it's being delivered. Debra and I refer back a lot to Martin Haberman's work around the pedagogy of poverty, which is quite an old piece. You know, it's the early 90s, but it's truth. It's about how do schools set themselves up as being the curators of knowledge in their communities. How do schools establish themselves as that? And I suppose what we do in our work is we're saying we are those centres, we are the public intellectuals, we are here to support our families and our communities, and here is how we're going to do it. And one of those things is our pedagogy, and our pedagogy isn't going to be poor, it's not going to be cold, it's going to be rich, it's going to be vibrant. And we're going to have high standards, and we're going to have high expectations, and we're going to prepare the kids well for whatever exams they do. And just something else before, because I'm forgetting the fact that there's a lot of people listening to this, but we started all this in secondary. This isn't just, I was a hard-bitten, well, I want that hard-bitten secondary teacher. And I never thought for a minute I'd end up working a lot with primary schools like I do now. But we used to use this approach. We used to think in this way, even though for me, I was still learning about it and building my own vocabulary around it. We would do this with some interesting kids in town centre Barnsley. We'd be doing this, and we found that there would be a change in behaviour. Kids would be more willing to buy in if actually there was something worth buying into. So as a teacher and as a team of teachers, and using the guidance of Debra, of a few other people as well, we built a curriculum that was trying to get the kids invested in all the time. How do we get them to care? That was our thing. How do we get them to, they're streetwise, how do we get them worldwise?
And you've used it a lot in special schools as well, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's where that came from. Why do we have to do this? It's ages ago. Well, we've got to probably start with where the child is at and then work outwards. You know, how do we get kids to care about, refugees drowning in the Mediterranean? How do you get a kid who's never been out of the town to be bothered about that? And those are our conversational starting points as professionals. We're starting with that.
The Egyptians that you were working on yesterday, was your intention to tie that in with COVID, with all that's been going on now, with the pandemic, with going back to school? Is there a link there?
I'll be honest with you, not at the moment. It's not there because all we've done is have Zoom meetings. I've never sat in a room with these good people, and I'm chomping at the bit to sit with them and to go into their classrooms and work with the children and model it and work side by side with the teachers, which is that's a key feature of what we do. I think we're okay at talking about it, but what's important to the work that Debra and I do is we'll go into the classrooms and we'll do it. You know, we want to try it out.
There's a question I got that's come through for Deborah, which but just with regard to the Egyptian, I'm thinking, yeah, if you had the situation where you could open up the Egyptian tomb, but there might be a virus in there that will, there's riches, it'll make you £1 million, but there might be a virus in there that will be unleashed by doing it, and whether that's
and that's it. That's what you've done there, Ian, is just start off. That's the potential beginning of a narrative. And it's not about coming up with a great drama script. It's just saying what positions, what dilemmas do we drop the kids into? And there's a dilemma just there.
You can have that one. There we go.
Thank you. I'm writing it down. That's a good one.
One of the questions that came through for Deborah specifically, they're saying, does dilemma-led learning always need to be in an imagined world? And that it's Rebecca's asking, working within an RE context, promoting tolerance and challenging misconceptions could bring RE learning to real life through dilemma-led learning. So, Deborah, and that's why I linked it in with COVID and what's going on at the moment. Can it be, there's enough real dilemmas, why do we need to make up ones?
Yeah, no, you can. I think the tightrope you're walking on there is when things are perhaps too frightening or too difficult politically to engage with head on. So, for example, if you look at the Palestine-Israel conflict, for example, a lot of teachers will give that a wide berth because it's a tricky thing to teach. Whereas you can go into it through, I mean, I do a unit of work around Jabberwocky, for example, when after the boy has brought the head of the Jabberwock back to the village, there's a declaration of war on the village from a rival tribe for whom the Jabberwock was sacred. And then we start with the children unpicking the motivations for conflict and whether or not there is a possibility for these two now very, very opposed tribes to find some common ground. Now, I'm not talking about Israel and I'm not talking about Palestine. And when we go into the history of the village, we look that there's some occupied territories and we look at the maps and all this kind of thing. But I'm not going there. But I know that what I've done is I've laid the ground for, if they see that on the news or they come across those kinds of issues in real life, they might think of the difficulties that those people in the story went through. But then there are other times when absolutely what is happening in the world right now is the way in. And I'm thinking particularly of the Year 8 group. It's years ago, probably about 2010, I can't remember the exact date. But we were trying to incorporate a curriculum project, a model that would bring together math, science and English. We wanted the core subjects to be united under a common dilemma. And we sat down as a team of teachers, thought about, you know, who in the world would need to know the things we would be teaching at this time. And it happened that science were teaching waterborne diseases, maths were doing data handling, thankfully, for me. And in English, we were looking at writing to instruct and writing to persuade over that half term. So English is always a bit easier because it can be more decontextualized. In the news at that time, the World Health Organization was announcing that there'd been some real concerns about the 1 million+ refugees in Haiti who were living under cloth and had been for about 6 months since the earthquake. And that the rainy season was coming, and that because they'd had no sanitary facilities, they'd been building latrines up the hillside, and it was going to be a public health disaster, because you can imagine what's going to happen to those latrines when the rainy season comes. So we decided that when the children came to English, they were trainee aid agency workers. And when they came to English, I was going to be training them how to write the instructions that people would need on the ground to keep themselves safe from waterborne diseases. And also we moved on to fundraising, writing to persuade to raise money in the real world for these people. In maths, they went to the Office of National Statistics, where they learned how data could be used to communicate a message very quickly and very effectively. And then in science, they obviously learned the science of waterborne diseases, did more or less what they would have been doing anyway, but their teacher is presenting her classroom and herself as a scientist working for the Centre for Disease Control. So these trainee aid agency workers are working with a real life dilemma. They're wading through a real life dilemma, but from the safety of their classrooms, they know it's not quite true. And they're learning all the stuff they would normally have been learning in the curriculum, but they just have this context to place it within. Now, we couldn't staff it for the whole year group. We only had enough teachers who were willing to give it a go to cover it for about half the year group. So it ended up with a, you know, not by design, by accident really, but with a control group. And what we found was that the teachers were feeding back things like the language of the children was heightened. They were reaching for that tier 2 vocabulary because they wanted to sound like professionals. They were grabbing for things, words like juxtaposition and, you know, various other things that they wouldn't normally use in a classroom context. They were managing their own behaviour. We noticed some of the children, I remember there was one memorable moment where a girl turned around to a couple of boys in her group who were messing around and said, right, you need to stop this now. We're Skyping the UN in half an hour and we've got a deadline. You're being unprofessional. And it was just the way that was framed, which was just beautiful. And then ultimately, they didn't want to leave the classroom. They were staying at lunchtimes, they were staying at breaks, they wanted to put fundraising activities on, they wanted to push the tasks that we'd designed beyond the level. And then some strange little things happened, like children bringing the texts in written in French. And I said, oh, I'm marking this for English. And they said, yeah, but they speak French in Haiti. So we had them translated. So all those little levels of beyond engagement. I mean, I know Hywel's going to talk about this in a moment, but moving children towards investment were there. And then ultimately, at the end of the year, when they sat their normal tests, on the whole, and accounting for differences in starting points, that half of the year group way outperformed the other half of the year group in end of year tests. So the knowledge had been retained and was tested, but I think it was the fact that it was so deeply meaningful that had made the difference for them.
Wow. I mean, one of the questions that I think you partly answered it anyway is the sense to which somebody's saying, Sandeep is saying, I teach challenge-based learning, but there's a need for them being knowledge rich as well. And we know that's, you know, schools get extra funding if they're knowledge rich, because that's what Deb likes to look of in England. Can we overload them? What if we miss the warmth? What you seem to be saying is done well. We can, that blend of the knowledge and the autonomy and the independence and the dilemma, it works across a multidisciplinary way.
Yeah, I mean, you can't achieve a goal like that without having the knowledge. The children desperately want the knowledge though, because they have a goal to achieve, rather than this is today's learning objective. Do you know what I mean? So it's giving it an impetus and a purpose.
Yeah. That linked to that, and one of the questions as well, before we go back to Hywel, I'll talk to Hywel about engagement and what you call beyond engagement and investment. Somebody's asking, do you see art and music as an integral part of this to create the warm curriculum? But I know it's in the way that drama does, but I also know I've seen you in action with around the world with ISTA, the International Schools Theatre Association, where they will tap into the other arts as well as the drama. So what's your experience of like music? I know you did a thing with after a visit to a concentration camp with singing, for example, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, they can be completely woven in. I think the thing about the performing arts in particular, and I've actually had a conversation about this just this week, is with music and with visual art in particular, and dance, there's a very specific skill set that children need to be able to achieve. So it's harder for somebody to just come along and say, I'll just teach all the arts. But when you get a team of specialists together, working under a common umbrella or with a common aim, like the work that we did in the concentration camp, it becomes really, really powerful, because your art forms find different ways of communicating the same questions about human experience and human endeavour. And I know in Wales, where Hywel and I have been working quite closely with a few schools now, the expressive arts departments now are expected to weave in and work closely together. So, for example, we've built whole units of work under umbrellas like art as resistance, art as identity, art as a reflection of society. And we've looked at different art forms and different artists under those umbrellas, but then got the children to think about a particular dilemma or a particular circumstance that they want to unify the arts around, in terms of resisting, or in terms of aesthetic, or in terms of finding a way of commenting on the society they live in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and that's in Wales. You said that's in Wales,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
they introduce a whole new curriculum and working in a very different way from the English model.
yeah.
A lot of people, certainly when I'm abroad, talk about the UK education system. We have to say no. Scotland often looks to Scandinavia England seems to be looking to America for where it's coming from with its model at the moment. And Wales has got a whole area around creativity, and the fact that they're not going back, they're putting health and safety first before they open up the schools. There's some really interesting stuff going on in Wales.
Yeah,
Hywel, so engagement, beyond engagement, investment, how do you get to that?
Well, sorry, I've got the word creativity in my head now because you just said it, and there's a word that's been maligned and ruined. I remember having an inset day when I was full-time teaching, and we had some people come and tell us we had to be more creative. So we were all, we all had manners. Do you know what I mean? So we all engaged with it, and we all joined in, and that was on a Monday, and the kids came in on the Tuesday, and I had a year 11 form group, and one of my kids came to me at the lunchtime on the Wednesday and said, he was called Paul Whitefield, this kid. He said, "Sir, what happened on Monday at that training day?" And I said, "Why, Paul? What do you need to know for?" He said, "Just tell me what happened," he said. And I said, "Well, we learned, we had to be more creative when we were teaching you." And this kid, he just went, "I thought as much." He said, "I've only been in a day and a half and I've already done 4 raps." Because one of the things on the day was you should try, get knowledge over by rapping more. And it was just really funny because this kid had 4 raps, and he said he wouldn't be able to look at the head of science in the same way ever again because he'd gone all wiggity wiggity whack in the science lesson. So creativity is one of those words. It's one of those things that's been maligned, and yet now in the situation we're in, the demand is that we have to be creative. And I mean, it's really been brilliant to see schools and teachers and school leaders responding in the way they have. It seems impossible, and they've had to do more than engage. They're more than engaged in their jobs, these people. They are more than engaged in their jobs. And so if going back to the question about engagement, I think I've started to think that engagement is just the articulation of manners and the meeting of expectations, which are probably printed on an A4 sheet that no one reads next to the whiteboard at the front of the class. I think we need to change that. When back in the day when Debra came to work with us on curriculum, I mentioned other people came in to help. One person that came in was Dorothy Hethcote, who, if you Google her, you'll find her. The funny thing about her coming to support us as a kind of a visiting consultant was I think she was 80 years old and walked with sticks, but her mind was absolutely sharp as. And I taught a lesson, and at the end of it, she just said, "What do you want, Hywel? What do you want?" Oh, she'd walked in and one of my kids had said, "Sir, why have you brought your nan on?" And she laughed her head off at that. She said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I just want the kids to be engaged. That's it." And she said, "Is that all?" And do you know when I know it, just as a teacher, you just give me the answer. What do I need to do? Tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that's where I was at with her. And then she just spoke this, and it's been published. You can find all this stuff online. But she talked Debra and I through this. It was this idea of you get the kids' attention. That's the first job of a teacher. Should be a no-brainer, that, because as soon as the kids walk in, everything's right. You mean business without being mean. You mean business. You got the kids in. They know that they're in safe hands with you. They know that actually what you're going to do with them is quite hard. So actually there's a bit of an onus to protect kids into what you're going to do with them. And then you get them interested somehow. And that was where the idea of a starter came from. I'm sure it was. A starter was supposed to pique the interest of kids. We used to talk about hooks and lures to learning and things like that. So you get them interested. And then you'd get to the if you like, the body of the lesson, and you get the kids engaged and they crack on with a task. In the 80s, that was copy off the board. That was your engagement task, copy off the board. But I'm hearing tell now of kids copying off interactive whiteboards, copying off. They're still doing it in some places. That's not engagement. That's just kids doing what they're told and not wanting to get into any bother. If I just keep my head down and I copy that, job's a good one. What we suggest in our work is there's well, and what Dorothy Hethcote suggested to us initially was there's engagement, but then if you want to get to the depth, you've got to take them over the bridge from engagement to investment. So if you want kids to really make progress, I think in your lessons, they've got to be invested in, and that's hard. That's hard. But that's why teaching's hard. Because actually we've got to come up with a toolkit, a deep toolkit of ideas and strategies that gets kids across that bridge of concern. She called it, didn't she, Debra? She called it a bridge of concern. So you get the kids bothered about something. I'd say botheredness, but she called it concern. And that's where you get that movement from engagement to investment. And that's where you've got the kids. It's not, fireworks aren't going off or anything like that. Kids are just perhaps, it's all right in your class. A learning work will still come in and say, oh, your children are very engaged, but you can look around and them. So you'll be able to say, actually, these kids are actually really bothered about what they're doing. They're invested in it. And, and in a year one class, there's a little girl coming up and saying, can I please take this home and show my mummy? That's investment. And then you have to say, no, that's got to go in the Ofsted folder. And I'm waiting for the laugh, but there ain't no laugh.
We'll put it in. We'll add it later.
Yeah, okay. And then beyond investment, you've got that idea of obsession, where and we've all been obsessed. I think most teachers have been obsessed about something they've been learning about in their lives, which is why you might have gone and done a degree in it, which is why you might have become a teacher, because you were passionate about literature. Do you know what I mean? So engagement, bridge, investment, obsession. And I learned that then. And that's where all this idea of warm and cold dead curriculum and kids engaged and stuff. Why do kids switch off? All those conversations, I think they do actually come back to the curriculum and how it's delivered. I've just realized that now.
Oh, finally.
Yeah, I'm going to get off now.
Recording it for posterity. You used the word and we're really keen that you reclaim that word. It's your word, botheredness. And that's a book that you're working on at the moment.
Yeah.
I think Press. So, and I want to come back to Debra, and I want her to describe her 4 pillars of the curriculum from her last book, Curriculum of Hope. But just botheredness, Hywel. Just what? Oh, there we go. It's great. Most people wave their own books around. You wave somebody else. You're very generous, Hywel. Great.
I'm rubbish at this.
How do you define botheredness, and how does a teacher get it?
I think I'm writing a book on it, so it's long. It's a long-winded thing, but it's everything we've talked about. I mean, if I just use the example of the teachers I'm working with in Leeds and in Barnsley, and they were looking at curriculum, and I said earlier, they're coming from some of the schools that they're in, they've had a tough time of it with Ofsted and so on. They've got there's communities they're supporting and stuff like that. They're going much more beyond Egypt, do you know what I mean, and Egyptians. There's a lot more. It's a lot more complex than that, as it is in loads of schools, isn't it? And especially at the moment. Anyway, it's how do we get children to invest, to use that word again, in the content? Many children, the vast majority of children, I think, well, the vast majority of children I've taught, and I've taught a few, they'll buy in. They'll buy into, but I think they've got to buy into the teacher. I think there's a bit of that going on. I think, we could do a whole other webinar about just being bothered about, finding connections with children, finding wavelengths with children, understanding why children behave the way they do, why they behave differently to your own kids or whatever. I think that
Mark finished yesterday talking about relational practices,
yeah,
and restorative practices. He talked about connection before content.
Yeah, I've heard Mark say that before, and it's spot on. And all I've got, I mean, a lot of this is anecdotal, because it's experience and it's what you see. I visit enough schools to see it, and I'll see it in the warmth. And I'm really being careful not to use the word charisma, because I've just used it, but it's because I've seen people who are everyone teaches differently, and this isn't about buying into one style of teaching. This is about ensuring that your children feel safe with you, even if they don't know how to express that, I guess. But I think you've probably covered all that with Mark. So I've got to teach Shakespeare. How am I going to get them bothered about Shakespeare? Well, I've got to build the botheredness. So rather than diving straight into a Shakespearean tragedy, we look at some examples of failed, flawed people from the real world. We look at them, and then we go into Shakespeare's Macbeth. But we've started with something that perhaps the children in the room are going to be able to talk about and contribute to. It kind of starts with them, but obviously I'm in control. We're in control of what we're doing, and that takes me back. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on now, but the creativity aspect of it isn't a relinquishing of responsibility. To be creative, I think, in a classroom, you've got to be absolutely on your mettle. To be creative in your classroom, you're holding on to them, but you're kind of letting them go as well. But what is botheredness? It's just getting children to absolutely invest in what they're doing, rather than using fear, rather than using punitive sanctions, which I guess, we need to have well-ordered and well-run schools like that, with things like that. But we need to make sure that the children are being protected into their learning. There's all sorts. It's all floating around in my head, and I'm struggling.
You're doing well.
Just right now, I'm struggling.
You're doing well.
I'm all right.
As you were talking, I'm thinking, oh yeah, you could do a whole essay around Lady Macbeth and Dominic Cummings.
Yeah, exactly. Washing his hands in the rose garden.
Yeah.
Just washing his hands. Yeah.
You know how that ended up. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to write an essay on that now, I think.
Yeah. Off you pop.
Debra, the 4 pillars of the curriculum. How might a school, by taking them on, but reading your book or listening to you and taking them on board, be able to use the curriculum as leverage from what's gone on now to create a better education for their children going forward?
Well, I think when I came up with it, there are 5 pillars actually. But when I came up with it, it was an attempt to make sure that they were equally important and considered to be equally important. And I was reflecting on kind of the work that I'd done over the past sort of 20, 30 years, and how each one had been of equal importance. And then when the new Ofsted framework came out, and there was this emphasis on rich knowledge and coherence in the curriculum, I wanted to make sure that those things weren't the only things that schools focus on. It goes back a little bit to what we said earlier about the national curriculum that is presented to us as the minimum expectation, and how we build from that. So at the top of that list, but not necessarily the most important, I put credibility. And on reflection now, I think I should probably have called it content. Tina Farr, who's a fantastic head teacher at St Ebb's School in Oxford, she changed it to content after negotiation with her governors, because they said you don't have to be defensive about it. You don't have to be defensive, as if to say my model does have credibility, it does have knowledge at it. And that credibility strand is the knowledge strand. These are the things that children are going to learn and know and be confident in grappling with at the end of this unit. It's a very important pillar of the curriculum. And next to it is coherence. So the coherence is about the child's experience from entering school to leaving school, and how things have built upon each other in some ways. Now, some schools are thinking about those as progression statements and progression of knowledge, and that's okay. That's kind of one pathway you can take. But there are all kinds of other webs of coherence you can build in a school. And I know I don't feel like I've properly answered Maxine's question about the music and art, but for example, if you're looking at blues music, which is commonly on the Key Stage 3 curriculum for a music teacher, then it would make sense that at the same time, we're looking at the civil rights movement in history, that children in English are reading the work of people like Maya Angelou or Zora Neale Hurston or Toni Morrison or whoever it is, that there's some kind of connected web of coherence so that children see that real life events, real historical events, real people's lives impact on literature, they impact on art, they impact on music, they impact on dance. You could look at capoeira, you could look at all kinds of dance forms that have emerged out of protest. And that's the kind of coherence that might map across a secondary curriculum. That is perhaps not just about, you know, this bit of knowledge building on this bit of knowledge, building on this bit of knowledge. And then the third one is community. And I suppose it ties into this very nebulous version of cultural capital that again is in the Ofsted framework. But it should be about much, much more than developing children's cultural capital. Of course, it should be about visits to museums and trips and artistic experiences, but it should also be about the capital that exists within the community as it is, and the opportunity to work with that community. So whether it's parental expertise, whether it's local businesses, whether it's local organisations. I mean, looking at the Reclaim project in Manchester, that would be an excellent example of how schools can engage with community groups to enhance children's education. And that's really important because the community strand then gives the opportunity for children to take their learning into a real environment. So, you know, Hywel and I have done a unit of work around an old lady living in a house at the edge of the sea, falling off the edge of the sea. And nominally, in terms of the credibility angle of the curriculum, they're learning about coastal erosion. But the humanity strand running through that is the fact that there's an elderly lady living in a house surrounded by her memories who can't bear to leave because fundamentally that's all she's got left. Her daughter lives in Australia, she's lonely. And so the community strand, the community pillar, is not just about the children using that story to understand coastal erosion. It's about the children thinking, what can we do about elderly people in our own community who are lonely? How can we build those links? So that in the school where I first started that off, there's now an intergenerational project that is really well connected with charities, with old folks' homes. Obviously they can't visit their care homes at the moment. So that community strand is really important because it links to the next one, which is compassion. And it's about putting children into the situation where we're not only throwing them into situations where we want them to develop empathy, which I think we do quite well in schools anyway. We'll find books and we'll find texts and we'll find examples that get children feeling empathetic towards other groups. But empathy can be a little bit overwhelming. It can be one bad thing happening to people after another. And if we're not careful, if you look at some curriculum, you know, children are like, the climate's changing, animals are becoming extinct, the planet's dying, old people are lonely, migrants are drowning. It could just be completely overwhelming, which is where the dilemma-led learning comes in, because it has to be solution-focused. And if it's solution-focused, the child has agency, they have power, they have some sort of control, they have some sort of say. So the compassion strand is about active compassion, it's about solution-focused thinking and problem-solving, so that children aren't just being presented with a world that looks quite scary, but they're being presented also with all the things that are happening, the innovations that are happening in the world to make it a better place, and thinking about what they can do within the local communities to help too. And that leads us to the creativity, because the final strand, the final pillar, is creativity. And creativity not just as in, we're studying the Vikings, so we'll make a shield, or we're doing the Romans, so we'll do a mosaic. It's not about ticking off the art and DT national curriculum objectives, but it's about utilising the knowledge that you've got to find creative solutions. And it's very knowledge rich because it's about fluency of knowledge. So to be able to take something out of one subject box and apply it to another subject box and see possibilities for how those things can connect is just as important as creativity through the arts. So I know it's a really long-winded explanation, but the 5 things are interdependent and they're equally important, and it's not trying to privilege one of them over another.
The first C, was it credibility or content?
Well, I called it credibility, and I was just saying I wish now, in retrospect, that I had called it content instead.
Well, 2nd edition, we can change that. No. So we've got content, credibility, coherence, community, compassion, and creativity. Those are the pillars that are holding up the curriculum. I can't think of a better time than when schools go back in these next few days and weeks and months. I can't think of a better time where that sort of curriculum is what's genuinely needed, because it's knowledge rich. You can learn, you can carry on learning things, but you're doing it in a way that is human and humane and linked and relevant. That's the future. That's the way ahead. It seems to make so much sense. What would be? We've got 3 minutes left. So thank you for that, Debbie. Hywel have one final thing to say. You might have worked out what he thinks by now. What would be, Hywel, your advice to teachers, whether it's primary, secondary, or special, who are at some point will be going back? What would be your advice from your experience of sort of day 1, 2, 3?
Sorry, I've struggled with. I'm giving advice to teachers. I'm not sure. I think. Pardon?
What would you do if you were?
Well, if I were going back, I'd just be wanting.
You're a drama teacher. It's tough.
Yeah, I'd be absolutely conscious of the fact that everyone in the room, and that includes my TA who's working with Toby just over there. Everyone has been through a strange experience, that everyone has got stories to tell now. And I'll be honest with you, as an English teacher, as a drama teacher, as a science teacher, as a maths, I'd like to share the stories a bit. Let's just find out what's been going on, and let's find out where we're starting from now. Because a lot of those kids, and I'm thinking, my son's in year 10, and he's had some anxieties about missing school, and he's had the anxieties about missing his friends and things like that. It's about just, he's chomping at the bit to go back. So it'll be like, for a lot of kids, it'll be like coming back home, if that makes sense. And that is that if they feel like that, that's warmth. That's there in your culture. If kids are really keen to see you as a teacher, then be really, really keen to see them. And I don't know many teachers who wouldn't be. You know, I don't want to give advice, I don't think. But that's what I'd be doing. How are we? Are we all okay? Where should we pick it up now? This is where we got to. This is what I asked you to do. No, don't worry about it. Let's pick up now. Let's pick up now.
Tell us your stories. I love that. I love that. You and I, Hywel, we did a session down in the South Coast a couple of years ago, and for the local authority or some chain, and on their banner, proudly, what did it say? Achieving expectations. That was their
meeting needs.
Meeting needs and achieving. Yeah, that was
meeting needs.
That was their proud boast, and go beyond that. You both, as I knew you would, given so much in this hour. There's 102 people waiting outside, going to lynch us because they got their. They thought they were able to come in and they couldn't because of the way Zoom works. I just assumed it would cut off at 100, but it doesn't. So everybody got a ticket, but only 101 were allowed in. So you might be lynched when you're outside, but we will make it available to people, the video next week of it. So just be careful out there. Thank you ever so much. Brilliant, as I knew it would be, both of you. I can't wait to share a pint with you again.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Somewhere else in the world, as it tends to be. Attendees, thank you for attending. I know it's
thank you, everyone.
Half term, and you could have been sitting in the Rose Garden, but thank you for being with us. Remember, chuck some money in the bucket for NHS Relief Project, or Winston's Wish, or Big Issue, or our SPB. If you want any more information from us, at ITL Worldwide on Twitter, keep the conversation going, independentthinking.co.uk, the website, blogs, and lots of stuff on there. Find out more about Hywel and Debbie. Ian at independentthinking.co.uk if you want to make contact with me, independentthinkingpress.com. 30% off all the books at the moment. If you use CPD 30, 50% off the ebooks. If you use VAT 50, they knock the VAT off ebooks, so we're sharing that. All sorts of ways that we can help and support. And good luck, everybody. Thank you for all you do, and stay safe. I'll see you again soon.
See you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.